Today we're talking about the Indiana Jones films. This is a very entertaining franchise that started in 1981 and has been continuing all the way up into modern day. It stars Harrison Ford as the titular hero, Indiana Jones, and it was directed by Steven Spielberg and produced and co-written by Spielberg and George Lucas. This was the meeting of the minds, so to speak. The creator of Star Wars and the creator of Jaws coming together to make an amazing adventure serial series. So without further ado, I'm going to give you my ranking from worst to best. Coming in at number 4 is 2008's Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I actually do not hate Crystal Skull. A lot of people do, and a lot of people have the problems with it, and I agree with a lot of those problems. I do think the film has too much CGI. I think that the villains are a little bit cliche and kind of comic, too comedically inclined, I'll put it that way. I think that Shia LaBeouf is decent as Indiana Jones' son, but not nearly as cool or as gruff as Indiana Jones. But it is nice to see him in the movie. He's not terrible. And I do like to see Karen Allen returning as Marion. Look at Karen Allen there. Look at her face. This was a good film, I think, but it is noticeably flawed. I understand some people not liking it, but I think it was a unique adventure. This time we see Indiana Jones on a quest to find these crystal skulls, which are actually from interdimensional beings, and he will try to keep them out of the hands of the Soviets who want to use them for their power. This is an entertaining film that is flawed. It's not perfect, it's far from great, but I do think it's good. It has its problems. Everyone knows about the fridge sequence. Everyone knows about the gophers and the monkeys. It's an odd film in that right, but those moments are brief and few and far between. I think all in all, this was a good continuation of the franchise, and one that I do enjoy. It's not the greatest in the series, obviously. It is probably technically the worst of the 4 movies that we currently have, but I do like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A decent film. Give it a shot. Coming in at number 3 is 1984's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This film has Indy going up against a cult-like group who are trying to use these ancient stones for, I guess, the ultimate power. And they've enslaved these Indian children to work in their mines, and just a really nasty, scummy group of villains this time around. Indiana Jones must get in there, try to rescue the stones from these villains, and save the children in this very dark and twisted entry into the Indiana Jones franchise. This is the darkest of the series. Released in 1984, this film basically made Indiana Jones a damn near R-rated movie. Parents were actually very upset that this film got a PG rating, and it actually caused this, along with Gremlins, 2 Spielberg movies. Well, Spielberg produced Gremlins. Basically, this and that movie caused the MPAA to create the PG-13 rating. Because basically, Spielberg argued, how about a new rating that is above a PG but not quite an R? Like a PG with a little bit of hot sauce on it, he described it as. And this film, you could thank this film for creating the PG-13 rating. This is an awesome film with lots of action, lots of great visual effects, really dark atmosphere. It's a good continuation. This film is also technically a prequel, meaning it takes place before the first film. And a lot of people don't know that. The reason why they did that, they didn't want Indiana Jones fighting Nazis again, so they figured they'd change it up by giving it a slightly different time period of the, I think, mid-30s. A great film, and one that I very much enjoy. Coming in at number 2 is 1989's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, starring Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones and Sean Connery as Henry Jones Sr. Look at Sean Connery there. Look at his face. This was an awesome sequel to the original film. Basically, Temple of Doom was more or less the oddball of the series, changing things up and giving us a unique experience. This film decided to take the series back to its roots, making it more like the original Indiana Jones film, And it really does show. This is more or less a very similar film to the first one, just a slightly different plot. They're even going after biblical artifacts again. This time we see Indiana Jones trying to get the Holy Grail away from the Nazis before they use it for their gains in an attempt to win the war against the Americans and the rest of the world. This is a very unique plot, a fun premise. It's probably, in my opinion, the most entertaining Indiana Jones film, and the one that I enjoy the most, as far as pure entertainment. But it's not my favorite. I do really respect this film for being fun as hell, but there is one film that I like more, and that is 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is the best Indiana Jones film, in my personal opinion. The first one is the best one, and it has Indiana Jones going on an adventure to get the Ark of the Covenant before the Nazis can get it and use it to rule the world. This is a very intense and fun entry into the franchise. And later, they actually put Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark on the box art, but the movie is just called Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's the best of the series. I absolutely love this movie. This is what happens when you get Spielberg at his best and George Lucas at his best and have them work together to make an amazing film. If you have not seen this film, I highly recommend it. It is highly entertaining and probably the best adventure movie of the 1980s, if not the best adventure movie of all time. Raiders of the Lost Ark. Check it out. And Indiana Jones was not only the star of movies, but there's also a TV show called The Young Indiana Jones Adventures, which I do not own, but I have seen many episodes of. There's also comic books as well as regular books, and of course, my personal favorite, secondary form of media, video games. There were several video games released, a few on the Atari, there were several on the NES, and I even had one of the Last Crusade video games on the NES, but couldn't locate that one, but it's around here somewhere. But I figured I'd show you a few of the ones that I do have and that I enjoy. First up, we have Indiana Jones Greatest Adventures. This more or less is the first three movies in one game. It goes through the plot from Raiders all the way to Last Crusade. And it is a very fun, entertaining 2D side-scroller. Lots of action, lots of intense levels, great visuals. Just a really fun Super Nintendo game, and one that I highly recommend. If you like Super Star Wars, which is made for the Super Nintendo as well, you'll probably like this game. Very similar in terms of gameplay. Up next we have Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. This was released as a Blockbuster exclusive back in 2000. More or less one of the last major games released for the console. But if you order it through the website, you can actually get the game to own instead of just a rental. I actually bought this at a used video game store for all of $35 a few years back, and now it goes for like $80. It's actually really expensive these days. It's a very fun and entertaining game, but it is very glitchy. It's the first 3D Indiana Jones game, and it's really unique. This was more or less Nintendo's answer to Tomb Raider, and it plays a lot like Tomb Raider. The funny thing is, they say Tomb Raider wouldn't work on the console, but if you play this game, I don't think that's necessarily true, because the levels in this game are actually bigger than some of the ones in Tomb Raider. And I think this is actually a very fun and entertaining game, and one that I do recommend. If you have an N64 and you don't mind shelling out $75+ try the Infernal Machine, which also had a Game Boy Color port, which I also own. This one's not nearly as good, but it is pretty fun still, and I do like it. There's also a Dreamcast version. No, sorry, not a Dreamcast version, my mistake. A PC version that was released. But believe it or not, the N64 version actually plays better than the PC version. So I recommend that one. Then there was Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. This is a badass game that was released on PS2 and Xbox. And if you can, get the Xbox version, which actually works on the 360 and Xbox One, because this is the superior version of the game. This is a really fun and entertaining 3D adventure game as well, only not nearly as buggy as the N64 one that came before it. It was then later followed by Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings on the Wii, PS2, PSP, and the DS, although don't really recommend the DS version. It's kind of meh, but it's okay though. It's not too bad. But this is actually the last great Indiana Jones game, or actually really the last Indiana Jones games they made besides the Lego ones. And it's really fun. You play as Indy and you try to get the Staff of Kings, which is actually Moses' staff that he used to part the Red Sea. An entertaining and fun game, but not quite as good as Emperor's Tomb, and not good as my technically personal favorite, Infernal Machine. But all these games are enjoyable, and I recommend pretty much all of them. Well, that's my list and my video. And if you are a fan of Indiana Jones, I do recommend these games, and I do think that this is a fun and interesting franchise. There's actually a 5th Indiana Jones movie being released next year, and I'm looking forward to that, although I have my fingers crossed to the quality of that film, considering the fact that Crystal Skull was a little bit of a letdown. But hopefully James Mangold can bring us a good movie, and I look forward to seeing a 79-year-old Harrison Ford once again playing the ultimate character and ultimate hero in Indiana Jones. That's my list. Thanks for watching. Leave your list down below if you'd like, and peace out.